Why are you helping me, human? The human soldier healed the wings of the hostile alien queen. The wreckage still smoked when I crawled out from under the hull plating, covered in soot, bruises, and an unfortunate amount of my own blood. The Arcanus 5 atmosphere was dry enough to bake bread in, and just as unforgiving. Sand clogged my boots. My knee ached like an old man's conscience. And somewhere behind me, what used to be the Terran strike cruiser, relentless determination, was now just a very persuasive argument against flying low through air-eye-controlled airspace. I sat on a piece of twisted fuselage, adjusted my cracked helmet, and tried the comlink again. This is Sergeant Cade Mercer, 5th Infantry Medical Division, requesting evac. Preferably before my organs begin to ferment. Static. I sighed and smacked the side of the helmet. Still static. Just for fun, I tried one of the emergency codes. All I got was a ghostly half-transmission that sounded like someone gargling alphabet soup through a subwoofer. Translation? I was alone. Great. I limped toward the only thing resembling shelter, a shattered temple-like structure half buried in sand, its spires sticking out of the ground like ribs from some ancient fossilized beast. I scanned the architecture as I walked. Definitely Erai, not recent either. This place had age, the kind you couldn't measure with carbon, only reverence. The wind whistled through the broken arches as I ducked inside. I activated my wrist scanner, low power, 10% battery, perfect. I made a mental note, punch requisitions officer when I got back. If I got back. Then I heard it, a low, ragged breath. Not mine, not wind. Definitely not friendly. I turned and there she was, sprawled among shattered crystal pillars and half-melted carvings, wings bent and bleeding, armor cracked like a dropped porcelain mask. She looked almost human, if a human had evolved in an opera and moonlight. Her skin shimmered faintly like quartz under starlight, and her long ears, elegant and twitching, pointed back like antennae catching every motion, every breath. Her eyes, an impossible violet, locked on mine, and despite all her wounds, she tried to sit up and reach for a weapon. "Whoa there," I said, raising my hands. "I'm not here to finish the job. You're clearly doing a fine job of bleeding out without my help." She hissed something in Erai, a sharp tonal phrase that my translator chip couldn't keep up with. Either she just cursed my entire lineage, or asked for herbal tea. I took a step closer anyway, slow, deliberate. Her right wing was twisted at the base, joint exposed and weeping a luminous fluid that my scanner identified as biologically analogous to lymph, but probably full of quantum enzymes or space magic or something equally terrifying. I dropped my medbag beside her and knelt. She glared at me like I'd insulted her ancestors and then married her cousin. "Why are you helping me, human?" "Because," I said, opening the medkit, "contrary to popular belief, some of us don't enjoy watching people die horribly in ancient ruins, even ones with very sharp cheekbones." Her ears flicked. That wasn't a compliment, and I'm 90% sure she didn't appreciate the humor. But I've always found sarcasm to be a decent distraction from gaping chest wounds. She watched, stiff and silent, as I sterilized the wounds along her back. Her muscles flinched under my fingers. The wings were worse than I thought. Torn membrane, exposed nerve clusters, minor fractures in the skeletal structure. I injected a mild analgesic after a moment's hesitation. Erai biology was still largely classified, and the last time I tried to treat a wounded Drethan with human meds, it grew gills and sued me. Still, her breathing evened out. "Your methods are crude. So's your bedside manner. We can trade notes later." She turned her head just enough to sneer. "You're mocking royalty." "I'm mocking someone who fell out of the sky and nearly crushed me with her majestic self. Your wings are kinda hard to miss." That earned a soft noise. Might have been a chuckle. Might have been her dying. "Don't suppose you've got a comm beacon hidden in that armor of yours?" "No, of course not." I scanned her armor, which was less battle gear and more fashion statement built for war. Intricate plating, organic reactive material, faint pulses of bioelectricity. One panel still glowed with active script. I tapped it. She slapped my hand away. "That part is sacred." So was my left tibia before your airstrike landed it in the next county. We're even. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't protest when I rechecked her vitals. No internal bleeding, a miracle, or very good air-eye genes. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The wind howled outside. My medkit beeped, battery dying. I adjusted her splint, then leaned back against a fallen column and exhaled. You know, I said, this is definitely not how I pictured my Thursday. Is that a day of worship? It's the day after Wednesday and before I lose the last of my sanity. She looked at me like I was malfunctioning. Fair. I probably was. Dehydration, head trauma, close proximity to gorgeous alien royalty. The usual cocktail. Eventually she shifted, just enough to test the new supports I'd rigged for her wing joints. The biofoam was holding, and the pressure gel I'd used on her muscles had begun its slow knit. You're not what I expected, she said finally. I get that a lot. She watched me closely. Are all your soldiers healers? Only the handsome ones. This time her ears twitched in what I think might have been amusement, or a sign she was about to kill me with a psychic pulse. Still unclear. You will not survive alone out here, she said matter of fact. Neither will you. I have protocols, implants. I am injured, grounded, and currently reliant on a sarcastic Terran with a busted knee and expired field rations. Silence again. The wind rose, sending a moan through the spires. Distant thunder, or something trying to sound like it, echoed across the sands. She didn't say anything else, just closed her eyes and folded her hands in her lap. I pulled my jacket tighter, leaned my head against the wall and muttered, "Well, Your Majesty, I guess that makes us survivors." And somehow, against all orders, logic, and the odds, that felt like the beginning of something neither of us were ready for. By the second day, we'd reached that special stage of camaraderie known as grudging toleration, which, considering we'd started at sworn enemies in a holy death temple, felt like progress. The Queen still watched me like I was one of those strange earth insects. Useful, maybe even fascinating, but also a bit disgusting. I, in turn, admired her ability to radiate contempt, even while leaning on me to walk. Her wing was healing, though slowly. The biofoam had bonded better than expected. Might have been the temple, might have been luck. Or maybe the AI metabolized Terran medical materials like protein shakes. I wasn't about to ask. The last time I'd tried to talk about her biology, she made a remark about humans and their obsession with dissecting everything, including conversations. We moved deeper into the temple. The storm outside had started flinging dust like it held a personal grudge, and what little was left of the wreckage behind us had been swallowed by it. Inside, the air was still, heavy with a metallic scent, and the subtle vibration of something ancient pretending to sleep. She refused to let me lead. "You don't know the structure," she said. "You're limping. I'm regal. Regal people glide. You're hobbling like a drunk flamingo." That earned me a glare and a whisper in her eye that translated roughly as irritating ground dweller. I considered it a term of endearment. Eventually, we found a corridor etched with a geometry that made my brain feel like it was rotating sideways. Erai's script pulsed faintly along the walls, soft blues and silvers, like moonlight trapped in crystal veins. Virelia ran a hand along them as we passed, her fingers twitching with recognition. The structure responded, humming underfoot. "Biometric resonance," she said without looking at me. "It remembers me. I hope it also remembers where the snack bar is. I'm running dangerously low on enthusiasm." We reached a chamber that curved inward, a spiral of floating stones orbiting a central platform. No obvious gravity wells, no support structures, just rocks hanging in the air like they were meditating. She stepped into the spiral without hesitation. I hesitated a lot. "Are these stable?" I asked. "They haven't fallen in 1,000 years." "Great, just checking, because gravity and I have a complicated relationship." I followed, testing each stone with a careful stomp before committing my full weight. The platform in the center shimmered as she touched it, her palm splayed against the surface. A rush of sound filled the chamber. Not quite music, not quite language. More like the memory of a cathedral having a very dignified panic attack. "Did you just Activate something? I asked. It's a diagnostic interface, she said, her voice calmer than I felt. The temple's core systems. They haven't been accessed since before the Sorrow War. I don't even want to know what that is. You would call it the time we vaporized your moon base. Ah, I said. That was a great Tuesday. Lots of paperwork. She smiled. Not wide, not friendly, but it was there, small and sharp, like a knife disguised as a compliment. Data began to stream above the platform, holographic arrays that spun in slow orbits, showing star charts, troop movements, genetic patterns. I recognized none of it. Varelia, on the other hand, moved through it like a conductor in some symphonic light show. She drew one cluster forward, narrowing her eyes. This shows current positions of AI fleets, she muttered. But out of date, by weeks. No update since the temple went dormant. Your side doesn't do push notifications? She ignored me. I wandered to one of the other consoles and poked at a display. It immediately hissed at me and flashed a warning in AI script. Okay, no touching, got it. Virelia looked over her shoulder. You tried to interface with a hereditary access node. I thought it was a coffee dispenser. Try thinking less. I leaned against a column and watched as she pulled more data. Schematics, communications, surveillance records. She moved like someone relearning a forgotten song. There was something almost gentle about it. Not that I'd tell her. Then, without warning, she froze. I stood upright. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, there's a tracking signal, a beacon, buried under the sublayer of the temple's communication array. Terran? She shook her head. AI, masked, buried deep, but not mine. Well, that's ominous. It's broadcasting coordinates. To what? To here. We both stood in silence for a moment, staring at the glowing data. How long until it brings friends? I asked. She didn't respond, which in my experience was code for sooner than you'd like. We retreated from the chamber. She moved faster now, urgency overriding whatever injuries remained. I jogged to keep up. I thought this temple was sacred. Protected, I said. It is. Was. What happened? You arrived. Wow, harsh. We found another chamber, smaller, rounder, filled with humming spires and strange flowers blooming from vents in the floor. Pale blue things that glowed and swayed without any breeze. Rest, she said. I need to think. I sat. She paced. So just out of curiosity, I said, what happens if your people get here and find you hanging out with me? They'll kill you. And you. They'll try to kill me. Oh, good, so we're equally doomed. That's nice. She stopped pacing, looked at me. Why do you joke like this? Because if I don't, I'll start screaming and never stop. She considered that, then to my surprise sat beside me. You humans are strange, she said. Flattery again? Careful, I'm emotionally fragile. Another flick of her ear, almost amused, almost. Do all of your kind heal enemies on instinct? She asked. I looked at her wing, now folded better, less trembling. Number just me. I'm uniquely bad at following orders. She nodded slowly, eyes tracing the bioluminescent ceiling. Then perhaps, she said, you are not the enemy I was trained to fight. I thought about that for a while. Thought about the war, the orders, the endless training that told me anyone with ears like hers was a target, not a person. Thought about the way she'd looked when I found her, fierce and broken all at once. I didn't answer. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, responding to some unseen cue. Her breathing slowed. Mine did too. Maybe tomorrow we'd be found. Maybe not. But for now, the storm outside could howl all it liked. Inside the old bones of the temple, two soldiers rested, not quite enemies, not quite allies, bound by wounds that might heal into something neither of us could define. Sleep wasn't something that came easy in a half-buried alien temple with collapsing infrastructure and a probable kill team en route, but exhaustion tends to beat anxiety if you let it wear you down long enough. I woke to a faint pulsing light from one of the far walls, slow and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a sleeping star. Varelia was already awake, seated cross-legged on the floor, her armor stripped down to the underlayer, thin cables from her gauntlet trailing into one of the crystalline nodes. "You ever sleep?" I asked, rubbing my face and discovering a new bruise that had sprouted overnight like a very angry mushroom. "Sleep is inefficient when danger approaches," she said. "That's a no." She didn't respond, too focused on the data streaming through her interface. Glowing glyphs flickered over her skin, mapping out a series of signals I couldn't make sense of. But judging by the frown pulling at her lips, it wasn't good news. "I take it your space Wi-Fi is still giving you trouble," I said, limping over. She glanced at me, clearly unimpressed. "The beacon signal has changed. It's been rerouted through an encrypted relay. Adaptive, high-frequency modulation. It's not just calling for retrieval. Let me guess, it's calling for backup." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. So we've gone from unlikely friendship to mutually assured vaporization? Awesome. She disconnected from the node and stood. "We need to move. This sanctuary won't remain concealed much longer." "Where to?" "There's not exactly a spaceport out back." She turned toward a narrow corridor, one that sloped downward, its entrance partially hidden by an outgrowth of what looked like fossilized coral. "There's a lower vault," she said. "It houses a transit core. Old air-eye tech, possibly still functional." I blinked. "Transit core? As in teleportation?" "Quantum displacement. Not instantaneous, but it might allow us to reach the nearest outpost." "Does it come with snacks?" She didn't dignify that with a reply, which I interpreted as a maybe. The passage narrowed as we descended, forcing us to duck and squeeze through twists of oddly organic architecture. Every few steps, the walls pulsed faintly, reacting to Varelia's presence. When I brushed them, they sparked like they were mildly insulted. Pretty sure one of them tried to sting me. "So," I said, carefully avoiding a patch that looked suspiciously like a glowing fungus, "this place was designed for your people only?" "It was designed to reject intruders. Still hurts less than a Terran DMV." Varelia paused at a junction, her ears twitching. "Hold!" I froze. She tilted her head, focusing on a distant sound. A deep, distant hum, subtle at first but growing. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in places that were supposed to be abandoned. She turned to me, her face calm but alert. "Drones. 2, possibly scouts." "Friendly scouts?" "Do you think I would use the word drones for anything friendly?" "Fair point." We ducked into an alcove barely large enough to hide in. I crouched beside her, pulse thumping against my ribs. She pressed 2 fingers to her neck and activated a cloaking field that shimmered briefly across her body. I looked at her, then at myself. "Do I get one of those?" "No, of course not." The drones drifted past a few moments later, sleek, insectoid things with sensor arrays like lanterns and an unsettling number of spindly limbs. They moved in perfect synchronicity, scanning the corridor in slow arcs. One passed so close I could see my own warped reflection in its outer shell. I held my breath. Varelia didn't move at all. After what felt like an hour compressed into 30 seconds, the drones continued down the corridor. Once the sound of their propulsion faded, I exhaled and slumped against the wall. "That was fun," I whispered. "Let's never do it again." She reappeared beside me, lowering her cloaking field. "They're relays. They'll report our heat signatures," which we were helpfully radiating like a pair of space lanterns. She pulled out a small device from her belt, no larger than a pebble. "This will scatter our biosignature trail. For a time, how long?" "Long enough to reach the core, if you stop complaining." "I'm not complaining. I'm narrating our doomed journey with style." We continued downward. The corridor opened into a chamber that defied geometry, like someone had tried to design a room using both Euclidean and non-Euclidean blueprints and decided to let them fight. Platforms floated at mismatched angles, and the floor twisted in slow motion beneath a shell of translucent crystal. The transit core sat in the center, a sphere of silver light encased in tendrils of machinery. It pulsed with quiet energy, like a forgotten star trying to remember its purpose. Varelia approached the console and slid her hand over it. The core responded with a series of deep tones that vibrated the chamber. "Power levels are low," she murmured. "Define low." "Enough for a single jump." "To where?" wherever it was last configured. I stared at the glowing orb. So, we're going to blindly fling ourselves through quantum space based on the last person's GPS preset? It's better than dying here. I raised a finger. That's technically true of a lot of bad decisions. Eating expired protein paste, for example. She input a series of commands. The tendrils retracted, revealing a narrow platform that began to rotate and glow with increasing intensity. The air tasted like metal and lightning. Then something above us shrieked. We both looked up as part of the ceiling retracted. A small vessel, air-eye design, sleek and silent, descended into the chamber. Its lights scanned the room, and the drone squadron that spilled from its undercarriage didn't wait for a polite invitation. Virelia shouted something in air-eye, sharp, commanding. The drones paused, for a moment. Then one opened fire. We dove behind the console as a pulse of violet energy scorched the floor. I fired back instinctively, my sidearm practically useless against their shielding, but it bought time. "Can you get it working now?" I yelled. "The core needs calibration." "Skip the safety check." She hesitated, then pressed a sequence I couldn't follow. The platform flashed. The energy intensified. I grabbed her wrist, pulled her onto the pad, and just as a second barrage rained down, the sphere erupted in light. It was like being flung through a glass bottle filled with stars and panic. And then everything went black. Pain is always a great welcome mat when arriving at a new location. I landed face first on something that felt like gravel, made out of regret and ancient concrete. My mouth tasted like ozone and hurt pride. Beside me, Virelia groaned, though in her case it sounded like someone cursing through a flute made of diamonds. Elegant, furious, mildly concussed. "Next time," I muttered, spitting dust, "we take the scenic route." We'd arrived in what looked like the skeleton of a city built underground, but not the cozy kind with lights and infrastructure. No, this place was vast and half collapsed, ceilings barely holding together with what looked like psychic duct tape. Hollow towers rose like broken teeth from the ground, and an eerie twilight hung in the air, artificial, flickering, like the lighting system couldn't decide whether it wanted to give up or fight on. Virelia staggered to her feet, checking the wings behind her. One of them twitched in a way I hoped meant still healing and not detonates when touched. She scanned the surroundings with that narrowed, calculating expression that usually preceded either violence or a brilliant plan. With her, those were often the same thing. "This was an old way station," she said. "Long before the war, a supply node." "Great," I said. "So any vending machines still operational? I'd trade an organ for something caffeinated." She ignored me and made her way to what remained of a nearby structure. I followed, limping only slightly, and trying not to look impressed by how she moved through the rubble like it was her private ruin. Which, okay, technically it was. Royalty and all. Inside the building, or what was left of it, we found a wall panel that still had a flicker of life. Virelia placed her hand on it, and the panel reluctantly powered up, groaning like it hated being awake more than I did. "Biometrics accepted," it said in a voice that sounded like it had been auto-tuned by a drunk opera singer. "Welcome back, high-aspect Virelia. You are late." She raised an eyebrow. "Define late." 6 centuries and 14 months. I stifled a laugh, then failed to stifle it. "You overslept," I said. "I hope you left a plant in the windowsill to water itself for 600 years. The panel flickered and displayed a map of the facility. Tunnels, storage vaults, what looked like living quarters, and something ominously labeled Containment Sector Omega. Naturally, that was the only section still fully powered. Of course it was. "We should check the command node," Virelia said, already moving. "Or hear me out," I said. "We find the lounge, drink something radioactive, and try to pretend none of this is happening." "I outrank your fear response," she replied without turning. "That's not even how rank works." We made our way through the dusty corridors, passing sealed doors and broken windows that opened into long shafts where wind moaned like bored ghosts. The further we went, the more the air changed. Thicker, charged, like the walls remembered everything that ever happened here and were very quietly judging us for it. The command node was at the end of a corridor lined with old statuary, air-eye figures carved from crystal, their features solemn and unblinking. I paused before one of them. "Is that you?" I asked, pointing to a statue with a familiar jawline and those signature long ears. She gave it a brief glance. That's my grandmother. Oh, well, good bone structure runs in the family. Also, terrifying. She once silenced a mutiny by reciting poetry until the rebels surrendered out of sheer despair. I suddenly like her a lot. The command node was in better shape than the rest of the complex, dimly lit but functional. Holographic displays hovered lazily, spinning meaningless data loops. Virelia approached the central console and keyed in an override. The system hesitated, then accepted her commands with the weary compliance of a butler long past retirement. As the data scrolled, I leaned on a nearby wall and tried to pretend I wasn't starting to enjoy her company. That way led to feelings, and feelings led to decisions. And decisions, especially ones involving crown-wearing alien queens, tended to get people shot. She froze again, fingers hovering mid-air. What now? I asked, already bracing for the worst. The beacon is still active, she said, and it's been redirected, not to a warship, to a diplomatic transport. That actually made me pause. Diplomatic? She nodded slowly, confusion tightening her brow. Someone high-ranking is coming, not to kill us, to negotiate. I gave a low whistle. That sounds suspiciously like progress. Or a trap. Also that. The panel beeped again and displayed an incoming transmission, audio only. The language was Erai, too fast for me to follow, but Virelia's ears flattened slightly as she listened. Not a good sign. She turned to me, expression unreadable. That was my uncle. Oh, good, I said. Family reunion. Should I dress up? He believes I have been compromised, that I am under Terran influence. You mean because I patched up your wing and didn't leave you to die in a pit? Yes, apparently kindness is now a war crime. Well, at least it's mutual. My commanding officer thinks I've either gone native or been seduced by alien propaganda. She tilted her head. Have you? I raised a hand. I plead the fifth, and we don't even have a constitution anymore. She paced the room in a tight circle, tension in every step. They'll try to take me back, she muttered. Force me into the unity process. Strip away my memories of this. Whoa, memory wiping. That's a thing? It's a punishment, reserved for those who fraternize with the enemy, which I assume includes having the gall to not stab me on sight. She didn't answer. A silence settled between us, heavy and too full of everything we weren't saying. Then she turned to me and said very quietly, I would rather die than forget this. I didn't have anything to say to that. My throat had decided it didn't trust words anymore, so I just nodded once. We need a plan, I finally said, and not the usual wing it and scream later kind. She gave a tiny, sharp smile. That's your specialty. Yeah, but your version usually involves explosions in a throne room. She stepped closer to the console. We'll give them what they expect. I'll surrender. You'll appear to be escorting me as a prisoner. I blinked. What? They'll lower their defenses. You'll be close. If things go wrong, I frowned. You're asking me to betray you, theatrically. I'm asking you to trust me, and to pretend you don't. It was a terrible plan. A reckless, complicated, borderline, suicidal plan. Naturally, I agreed instantly. The docking platform felt like the waiting room of doom. Everything gleamed in that overly sterile, diplomatic kind of way. Polished metal floors, too bright lights, air that tasted like recirculated tension. I stood at Virelia's side in my patched-up armor, pretending to be a model soldier while trying not to sweat through my undersuit. She was in full ceremonial regalia, the Erai equivalent of, I am here, I am important, and I might vaporize you if I'm not offered proper tea. I'd secured her wrist with magnetic cuffs that weren't actually locked. She could snap them in half with a sneeze, but the illusion had to be perfect. If our ruse slipped, this place would turn into a war zone faster than you could say, galactic incident. Remind me again what part of this plan doesn't end with one or both of us getting disintegrated? I whispered. She didn't look at me. The part where I improvise. That's the worst part. A diplomatic transport descended onto the platform in practiced silence. It was sleek, silver, shaped like a crescent blade with no visible seams. The hatch opened with a hiss that felt more judgmental than mechanical, and out stepped the delegation. 3 guards in pearlescent armor, and at their center, a man with Virelia's posture and her disdainful eyebrows. He wore long robes that shimmered in and out of color, like they couldn't decide which reality to belong to. "Uncle," she said without emotion. "Niece," he replied with even less. They exchanged glances that might as well have been daggers made of etiquette. "I see you've brought your human," he said, as if the word required sanitization. "Technically, I'm on lease," I offered. "There's a deposit and everything." The uncle ignored me and motioned to his guards. "Secure the prisoner. We'll escort her to the Ark for decontamination and reintegration." Virelia turned slightly toward me, the barest flicker of movement. That was my cue. "Actually," I said, stepping forward and tapping my wrist unit, "there's a change in protocol." The guard stopped. Her uncle frowned. I held up a hologram, freshly forged in the command node, and pulsing with all the bureaucratic authority we could fake. Per Article 7 of the Interfaction Conflict Clause, any captured dignitary must be examined by a third-party observer before reintegration. Article 7 was annulled during the Telnari Uprising. Reinstated during the Kadrina Accords, you'd know that if you updated your briefings more often. The uncle's eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly for a human. It's part of the uniform, comes with an optional sarcasm module." Virelia's wings gave the faintest twitch behind her, a subtle sign she was holding tension back like a dam cracking. Her uncle stepped forward, ignoring the guard's uncertain glances. "You're stalling. You believe this charade will fool me?" "Oh, I don't have to fool you," I said. "I just have to stall long enough." He paused. "For what?" The answer came as a deep rumble from beneath the platform. The old air facility had a self-defense grid. Virelia had reactivated it before we left. And now, right on cue, the ground shimmered, revealing glyphs carved into the stone beginning to glow with pulsing energy. "For the sanctuary to recognize her as heir again," I said. "That makes her royalty. And by heir law, forcibly relocating royalty without consent is, how do you say it in your language? A very bad move." The uncle turned slowly toward her. "You would invoke the right of preservation?" "I already have," Virelia said. "I am not your hostage. I am your equal. You will not erase what I've become." He studied her, emotion barely cracking through his expression. Then he waved off his guards. "So be it. But understand this, our people are fracturing. The unity process was designed to protect us." "Perhaps protection is not always obedience," she replied. "Perhaps we protect ourselves by remembering." That sounded very noble, very inspiring. I even resisted the urge to clap. Barely. The uncle gave me a look like I was something unfortunate stuck to his boot. "And what of him?" "He saved me." "Out of duty? Curiosity? Weakness?" Virelia looked at me for the first time since the meeting began. "Out of something you can't quantify," which was a really poetic way of saying, "Shut up, old man," if you asked me. He turned, robes fluttering like dramatic punctuation. "Your choices will cost you, both of you." "I've seen the bill," I said. "It's got your face on it. Not impressed." The transport lifted off in silence, vanishing into the upper atmosphere. The moment it was gone, Virelia let out a breath she'd probably been holding since the start. I unlatched the cuffs. "Well," I said, "I'd say that went moderately poorly in a very impressive way." She didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth twitched like the idea had occurred to her, and she was considering filing it for later. "You handled him well." "I have a lot of practice with arrogant, self-righteous authority figures. I was raised by one." "Your father?" "Number my academy drill sergeant. My father just yelled at cooking shows." She finally smiled, full and sharp. "Humans are deeply confusing." "Thank you, we practice." We started walking back toward the facility, the air quieter now, as if the world had stopped holding its breath. "So what now?" I asked. "Do you take your throne, build a council, write memoirs about the human who gave you sarcastic first aid?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I know I will not return to who I was. That person followed orders. This one questions them." I nodded. "Yeah, welcome to the rebellion. Our dental's terrible." She looked up at the sky, which was beginning to shift from pale gray to a deeper indigo. "They will come for us again. They always do. But next time, They won't find a broken queen and a stray soldier. No? I asked. Number next time, they'll find a force they didn't plan for. I considered that. So, not quite war, not quite peace? Something far more dangerous, she said. Something unclassified. I looked at her, wings still battered but rising slowly with the wind, eyes fierce with something new. Yeah, I said. That sounds like us. Varelia was floating upside down when I found her, hovering near the ceiling of the old command chamber, suspended by what I assumed was some AI telekinetic party trick. Her arms were crossed, her long ears twitching slightly with concentration or possibly irritation. I stood below her with a ration pack in one hand and a sour expression in the other. I brought you the last of the synth fruit gel, I called up. Don't say I never do anything nice. I can't eat when I'm inverted, she said, voice echoing faintly with psionic resonance. It messes with the gravity in my stomach. I blinked. That's not how digestion works. It is for me. I squinted at her, then looked at the pack. You're just making that up so you don't have to eat this thing, aren't you? It tastes like compressed regret. Exactly. That's the best part. It reminds us we're alive. She flipped gracefully, landing on the floor with barely a whisper of sound. The wings at her back shifted slightly, feathers still darkened with the remnants of injury, but stronger now. She took the ration, looked at it like it had insulted her ancestors, and took a cautious bite. I leaned against the console and tapped a few keys, pulling up the latest sensor data. We'd been in the sanctuary for 5 days now, and while no one had tried to nuke us from orbit yet, I was pretty sure someone out there was circling their calendar with malicious intent. Nothing on the long-range scans, I said. But there's a weird signal pulsing from the south quadrant, like really weird. The computer's labeling it as undefined biological resonance, which is usually code for runaway screaming. Varelia wiped gel from her lip with the dignity of someone refusing to admit they just ate goop. Could be residual energy from the old genetics lab. This place used to house experimental growth chambers. Growth chambers? Because of course it did. I turned to her. You ever think your ancestors were just a little too enthusiastic about questionable science? She raised an eyebrow. Says the species that invented a breakfast cereal that turns milk blue and calls it nutritious. Touché. We suited up, her in her new reinforced armor, AI mesh that shimmered like glass that could punch you, and me in my ever-loyal, slightly dented combat suit. It whined every time I bent over, but I like to think it was just offering moral support. The corridor to the south quadrant was narrower, dimmer, and filled with an annoying ambient hum that made my teeth vibrate slightly. As we moved deeper, the walls began to sweat. Not literally, but the condensation was thick, the air humid and alive. I wiped my forehead and glared at the nearest panel. Why is it always the creepy parts of ancient alien sanctuaries that are still operational? I grumbled. Why not the massage chairs or the planetary defense guns? Varelia crouched beside a flickering control panel, fingers hovering just above it. There's something wrong here. The signal's not just biological, it's sentient. I narrowed my eyes. Define sentient. Responding to us. Anticipating. I tapped my rifle. Well, that's just delightful. We stepped into the chamber at the heart of the quadrant, and I immediately decided that whoever designed this place had never heard the word subtle. The room was circular, massive, with a central column of pulsing energy rising from floor to ceiling. Suspended in the center was what looked like a cocoon, translucent, glowing faintly, and definitely pulsating in a rhythm I didn't like. It twitched. Varelia hissed something in AI, which I assumed was either fascinating or we should leave immediately and burn this place down. Knowing her, probably both. I raised my scanner. It's not AI, at least not exactly. Hybrid DNA signature. There's human code in there. She turned sharply. Impossible. Well, the computer doesn't lie, except when it does, but this isn't one of those times. She moved closer, scanning it with her gauntlet. This chamber must have been part of the Accord experiments, joint research between AI and human scientists, back before the peace treaties collapsed. Joint research involving gene splicing in stasis cocoons, I muttered. Our ancestors were lunatics. As we watched, the cocoon split. Not dramatically, not with gore and screams, just a gentle parting, like silk unraveling. Inside was a creature, or a person, depending on your comfort level with ambiguity. It looked vaguely AI but shorter, its ears less pronounced. Its skin shimmered with faint bioluminescence. Eyes opened, large and unfocused, locking first onto Virelia, then me. I said. Do we have a first contact protocol for this? No. Great. Hi there, I said, waving awkwardly. We come in peace unless you don't, in which case we run in panic. The being stared at me, then spoke in perfect IRI. Mother? I slowly turned to Virelia. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that's not something you were expecting. Her face was frozen, not shocked, not horrified, just calculating. This is a memory construct, she said slowly. My DNA mixed with traces of another species. It's not mine, it's a simulation. The being blinked. I am Virai, designate, continuation. Okay, I said, backing up a step. You guys really leaned into the ominous naming conventions, huh? The construct, Virai, looked at both of us with something like curiosity. Are we at war? Virelia stepped forward. We were. Are we still? I looked at her, not answering. She was silent for a long time, then finally said, That depends. On all of us. Virai nodded. I was designed to adapt, to learn from conflict and evolve beyond it. I crossed my arms. So you're a peace weapon? Peace through understanding, Virai said. Or failing that, peace through really effective defense. Great. You've got your mother's sass already. Virelia gave me a look. I am not its mother. Tell that to the glowing space baby. Virai reached out and touched the console, and instantly the lights in the room shifted. A map appeared above us. Galactic sectors, trade routes, conflict zones. But something new pulsed at the edge of it. A force, expanding, unknown. This is why I was awakened, Virai said. They are coming. I swallowed. Please don't say they like that. Be specific. Space pirates? Empire remnants? Star krakens? Virelia stared at the display, her face unreadable. Something older. Great, I muttered. That's never a good sentence. Virai looked at us both. I was made to choose sides, but now I ask, will you choose me? I exchanged a glance with Virelia. Do we have a choice? I asked. She didn't blink. We make one. I never expected the end of the world to be this quiet. The sky wasn't cracking open. There were no blaring alarms, no panicked crowds, no flaming debris falling through the atmosphere. Just a low, constant vibration in the bones of the earth, like the planet itself was holding its breath and hoping for the best, which incidentally was also my strategy. We stood on the edge of the ancient platform outside the sanctuary, watching as the anomaly bloomed on the horizon, a swirling void, iridescent and vast, folding stars into its gravity like a child hoarding toys. It hadn't reached us yet, but it was close enough to smell. Or maybe that was just the emergency rations in my pocket going off. Virai hovered between us, eyes glowing faintly, wings of light forming and unforming behind them as they adjusted their shape to some internal logic. They had grown since awakening, physically, mentally, even emotionally. Sometimes they laughed at my jokes now. Sometimes they created complex mathematical models to explain why they shouldn't have. Progress. I calculate a 96% probability of full assimilation if we do nothing, they said, blinking slowly. That's less than 100%, I pointed out. So you're saying there's a chance? Virelia didn't laugh, but her wing twitched slightly, her equivalent of a chuckle. She had changed too. Her movements were less rigid, less burdened by protocol and expectation. Her crown sat idle now, stashed somewhere behind a force field with the other symbolic junk of her royal lineage. She said she didn't need it to lead anymore. Said she'd learned a new kind of authority, one that didn't begin with command but with choice. So what's the plan then? I asked, adjusting the calibration on my wrist unit. Because I'm running low on quips and even lower on plasma cells. Virai turned to us. The anomaly feeds on predictability, pattern recognition, assimilation through anticipation. It consumes through understanding. Like my last relationship, I muttered. To counter it, Varai continued, ignoring me, we must do the one thing it cannot process. We must become chaotic, illogical, erratic. Varelia raised an eyebrow. You're asking us to act like humans. Varai nodded solemnly. Yes, I require lessons in unpredictability. I clapped my hands. Well, strap in, kiddo. I've got decades of poor impulse control to share. The plan, if you could call it that, was to merge Varai's consciousness with the sanctuary's central command node and fire a pulse of discordant energy directly into the heart of the anomaly. Think of it as slapping a god with a jazz solo. Improvised patterns, nonsense logic, cognitive noise, things that defied the anomaly's taste for order. The only catch? Someone had to interface with the node directly, and that someone had to be bonded to Varai, which, lucky me, I already was. You're certain you want to do this? Varelia asked as we descended into the central chamber. I shrugged. Am I certain I want to fuse minds with a semi-sentient hybrid who might scramble my memories like breakfast eggs? Number. But do I think it'll make a good story if I survive? Absolutely. She stepped in front of me, placing a hand on my chest. If you don't come back, I will find you. Even in the afterlife? No, she said. In the data stream, in the echoes of consciousness, I'll trace you like code. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. She leaned forward. Then come back, or I'll be very, very annoyed. The interface burned at first. Varai's mind folded into mine like a wave crashing through circuitry. I saw their memories, felt their questions, their yearning to belong, and they saw me, every flawed, reckless, stubborn bit of me. I expected rejection, I got resonance. Together we reached the core. Together we opened the sanctuary's mind. The pulse we unleashed wasn't sound. It wasn't light. It was jazz, metaphorically and literally. I may have uploaded an archive of late 21st century experimental saxophone solos. Because why not? The anomaly screamed. Not in sound, but in force. It flinched, recoiled, rippled back into itself. Chaos poisoned its hunger. It didn't understand irony. It couldn't process contradiction. We were a riddle it couldn't solve, and so it collapsed in on itself, a void devoured by the one thing it could never mimic: irrational hope. When I woke up, my head hurt like I tried to recite an entire encyclopedia backwards. Varelia was there, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. Am I me? I croaked. Mostly, she said. Your memories are intact, though you now hum jazz in your sleep. Worth it. Varai stood nearby, more stable now, their glow gentler. You survived the fusion. Of course I did, I said, struggling to sit up. I'm too irritating to die. In the days that followed, the anomaly's collapse sent ripples through the galactic systems. Not destruction, just change, as if the universe had sighed and reshuffled its deck. The Arai began reintegrating not through domination, but dialogue. A council was formed, not of rulers, but of voices. Varelia took a seat, not as queen, but as equal. Varai became a bridge between species, a living archive of two legacies fused by shared defiance. They said they wanted to travel, to understand other contradictions in the galaxy. I gave them my old flight jacket and a long list of places with excellent street food. As for me, I didn't go back to command. I'd had enough orders to last a lifetime. Instead, I found work teaching at a multi-species academy. Conflict mediation, diplomacy, advanced sarcasm. My syllabus was weird. My students were weirder. Varelia visited often. Sometimes we'd spar on the roof under a double moon. Sometimes we'd argue about Terran pop culture and end the night watching late-century cartoons while she pretended not to enjoy them. One night, long after the world had stopped ending, she sat beside me on a metal bench overlooking the stars. You never answered my question, she said softly. Which one? The first one. Why did you help me? I thought about it, about the war, the pain, the way her wings had looked when they were broken, and the way her eyes had looked when they weren't. Because, I said, you were supposed to be my enemy, and I'd spent too much time listening to people who told me what that meant. But when I looked at you, All I saw was someone who didn't want to fall. She nodded, wings catching starlight. I still don't. Good, I said, because I'm not done catching you yet. She smiled, slow and rare. Then let's keep falling together. And we did. Not into war, not into chaos, but into something new, something unclassified, something human, something awry, something ours. The end.